I'm choosing to be better in life, and I choose happiness. I choose drama-free life. I want a drama-free life. Oh my gosh. Colorado makes me feel like it's drama-free life because Colorado is just amazing. Absolutely amazing, sorry. But that's how I feel. I feel at peace here in Colorado. And everyone wonders why we moved to Colorado, because I do. I feel at peace here. I don't know how to explain it. I don't know how to describe it. I feel at home, if that makes sense at all.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. In this episode we're going to look at something that I think hasn't been looked at in enough detail. I think it is very important that we pay attention to this, and that is Shanann's communication with the realtor. Anyone remember her name? Ann Meadows. Does that ring a bell? Now we're going to go through the interview that Agent Galbraith did with Ann Meadows by phone on the 15th of August at about 5 or 6 minutes to 8 in the evening. That's on Discovery page 670. We're going to get to that. But before we do, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So I think the error I made when I first went through the Discovery and I read about the communication between Shanann and Meadows was I assumed that it was done on Facebook, and as a result it was sort of not available, put it that way. I also remember seeing a message on Shanann's Facebook that had to do with a house that was for sale and being a little bit confused by it. And so in this episode we're going to kind of just make a little bit of sense on that score. Okay, and so when we look at the text messages from Shanann, or sorry, I think it's actually Messenger, it's Windows, sorry, not Brighton. I think that's a typo. He's talking Brighton, possibly Fort Lupton. We can't move too far south because of his job. Thinking that area. And then Anne responds, got it, exclamation mark. And then she says, we talked about it last night. And then Anne responds, you move fast, with a smiley face. And then Shanann responds, we have thought about it off and on, but the construction behind us was holding us back. They have a lot of it done. And then kind of a face with the eyes pinching and the tongue sticking out, I guess in response to Anne's message. And then she says, but before I paint baby's room and more, I think it's better to see where we are at and options. And then Anne responds, my suggestion would be not to move too far out. The further you go, the more vulnerable your money is. I think she means to move too far out, kind of out of the suburbs. Brighton might be best. I think she means for both worlds. And then she also talks about Erie. So, and then Shanann responds, so Brighton is good. We don't want to downsize for the same price we are paying though. So she wants to downsize, and they want to, spend less or have a smaller mortgage. And then Anne responds, I think it might be a better option than Fort Lupton. Keep in mind that when the market turns, the outer lying areas get hit first. Brighton might be your best bet. And then Shanann responds, okay, sounds good. And then at the 25 minutes past 10 on Friday, she posted something from realtor.com. I think it was a house that she perhaps had her heart set on or was thinking about. And then she wrote, realrecolorado.com is the best spot. I will also send you a phone app. Sorry, that was from Anne. And then Shanann responded, thank you. And then Anne responded, any time. And then she also said, I was also thinking maybe we should have you talk to one of my lenders. What do you think? And then that is, I think, where Shanann's communication with Anne stopped, and she didn't communicate again. On Monday, Chris got a message from Anne. I guess, I don't know if it's by text or on Facebook as well, but I presume it's by text because he wasn't on Facebook anymore. It's actually an interesting question, just because he deleted his account. So how was he getting these messages? Anyway, she wrote, hi, I'm working on your market analysis. I would like to bring my listing coordinator with me when I bring it. Did you finish the basement? And the answer to that is no. Any other upgrades? And then she writes, thanks, but and then I don't know, it's just looks like a typo, or just she didn't finish what she was saying. Chris Watts responds, basement is still unfinished, no other upgrades. One thing that he did sort of look after was the garden. Not that that is necessarily an upgrade, but he was often mowing the lawn, and that was taken care of quite well. Then Anne writes back to him, this is on Monday, around about late afternoon, late morning, early afternoon. There's a house in your neighborhood, 6508 Saratoga Trail, looks like the same model. Do you agree? Confirming 3-car garage. And Chris Watts writes back, I will drive by the 6508 address when I get home. Now, when he did drive back, he was actually being summoned to a triple murder scene. He was being, the police had called, and so he was going home to account for the fact that he'd committed triple murder. But guess what? On his way home, he visited this address. That's kind of where his mind was. Anyway, Anne responds, thanks, Chris. Not a lot of comps. I have a call into that realtor to see what it sold for. It's under contract, so that will give us a number. Then Chris Watts responds, you're welcome. I'm not sure why none of these are time-stamped. And then, interestingly, Anne says, is Shanann okay? She hasn't weighed in all day. And note that Chris Watts doesn't actually volunteer. He doesn't say, okay, well, I'll get back to you on that maybe tomorrow. I'm not sure where Shanann is. He doesn't volunteer that. What he does do now is he responds saying, oh, she hasn't been around all day, it's very odd. And then Anne says, rightly, that's really weird. You must be worried, ? Have you checked with her friends or called and reported her missing? And it's quite interesting that the realtor's got to say to him, have you done this? Have you checked that? And that was kind of the theme that whole day. And then Chris Watts says, I've done it all. Police are handling it now. So as far as he's concerned, it's done. The police have taken over the search for Shanann. Then he says, send prayers, please. And then Anne responds, oh my God, I'm so sorry, lots of prayers. And then Chris Watts responds, thank you so much, Anne. And then, despite what is going on, Anne sends back, did you drive by the 6508? Chris Watts says, just did. Yep, that's the exact model. Again, I don't know what time this was sent, although there is a timestamp, Monday, 5:47 p.m. I don't think that's accurate. I don't think he'd just ridden by there then. I could be wrong, but we know that he drove by it around about 2 o'clock that afternoon. I think he arrived home at 14:07, so approximately 14:03, 14:04 he drove past that address. He also called the realtor earlier that day. then the realtor responded, all right, I'm waiting to hear back from that agent. Then we can set up a time to meet. Thanks for checking on that. And then he responds, you're welcome. Now, the part that I want to emphasize here is that Shanann is texting the realtor on August the 10th at 9:57 a.m. and also on Friday, also the 10th of August at 10:25 a.m. And this is going on until I think Saturday as well at 10 a.m. right? Now, so when I say text, it's not really text, it's actually by Facebook Messenger. So, but this is the point that I'm trying to make is so let me just ask you a question first. Do you think Chris Watts and Shanann had a conversation that morning? What do you think that conversation, if so, if you do think so, what do you think that conversation was about? Okay, the True Crime Rocket Science position has always been that they never had a conversation. And this is further proof of that, is that why would Chris Watts need to wake Shanann up on Monday morning to talk to her about selling the house if they'd already had a conversation about it? And Shanann says in this correspondence with Anne that they had spoken about it effectively on the 9th. And I've got an idea when they were kind of arguing on the 9th, it was quite a big day in a way, a lot was on the cards. I think Chris Watts sort of twisted Shanann's arm into saying, okay, I'll go with you to Aspen, I'll go to marriage counseling, but I need you to do something for me. What? Well, will you contact the realtor? We need to move, we need to downsize. And it's quite interesting how this isn't news to Shanann. It's not a shock to her. It's something that they've spoken about before. It's something that she's prepared to do. She's not resisting it. And so anyway, the whole point is if they'd already spoken about it and they'd spoken to the realtor about it, why the heck would they need to have a conversation that morning about selling the house? And furthermore, why would that conversation be upsetting? And you can take it even further and say, why would they need to buy another house if they were going to get separated? I mean, how does the moving from one house to another house play into the separation? I mean, when you are divorcing or separating from someone, you don't go and look for another house for both of you to live in. You look for sometimes either one different accommodation or for both. Does that make sense? But I can't really emphasize it enough, is to say they've already had the conversation that he says that they kind of had urgently on the morning of the murders. And what does that tell you? They didn't actually have that conversation. Why? Because the house was in his name and he wasn't going to sell the house and he didn't want to share. All the calls that morning were done as sort of debt damage control. He wanted to get the kids out of school, but before the school day even started, he called the school to say, well, his kids weren't going to be attending school. He called Ann Meadows to get the house sale on the cards. All of this is within hours, within like just 1 or 2 hours of burying his entire family. And of course he also called the bank then. So you can see that this is about enriching himself, just as he intended to kind of not enrich himself, but benefit himself by spending the rest of his life with Kissinger without the issues of divorce, alimony, custody, maintenance and all that kind of thing. Okay, now we jump to page 670 of the Discovery. Cassie Rosenberg, a close friend of Shanann Watts, provided that Shanann and Chris Watts used Ann Meadows, a real estate agent, to purchase their current house. It was learned that Chris Watts contacted Ann on the 13th about selling the house. Now, I think the same kind of premeditation that went into getting access to the well site ahead of time, in other words, so that there was plausible deniability. In other words, well, where did you go on the morning of the disappearance? Well, I just went to the work site. There was a release there. And if you didn't know the situation very well, you might think that was normal, even though it wasn't really normal. In the same way, Watts contacting Ann Meadows wouldn't have looked that strange if Shanann had also contacted him, except it kind of was strange, right? Agent Galbraith contacted Ann Meadows by phone on the 15th of August at 6 minutes to 8. Ann told me that Shanann Watts sent her a message on Facebook Messenger on the 10th of August to tell her that she and Chris Watts were thinking about moving. Now, that message was obviously instructional from Watts himself. She said she would be out of town and back in town Sunday night. She wanted to get together with Ann to discuss after she returned. Well, I don't think Chris Watts wanted that. Shanann asked for the best sites to be looked for homes on, and Ann sent it to RE Colorado and sent Shanann a mobile app to search with, and then sent Shanann a follow-up message suggesting they get pre-approved for a loan to begin with. Shanann did not reply, and Ann expected that she would once she returned to town. I don't know whether the pre-approval for a loan was going to happen. I certainly don't think that was something that Shanann could really be involved with given her credit score. That was something that was going to be up to Chris Watts, I guess. On Monday at 08:28, that's really early. That is about an hour and a half after Chris Watts arrived at the well site, and possibly even while he was at the well site, Ann received a 3-minute phone call from Chris Watts. This was really something that was on his mind. Ann was surprised and actually taken aback when Chris called, as it was Shanann that Ann usually talked with about real estate. And that makes sense. It was strange for Chris Watts to be calling, because strange and unusual things had been taking place earlier that day. Ann was their agent when they bought the house they were living in. She only talked with Chris maybe twice during the transaction. Chris asked Ann if Shanann had called her yet. So that's another kind of staging scenario. She told Chris she sent her a message in Messenger and that Ann suggested that he and Chris get pre-approved for a loan. Chris told Ann that no one knew yet, but he and Shanann were getting divorced after not getting along for over a year. Ann was shocked and told Chris that she was sorry. He told Ann that not even his family knows. And so he's still going to sell the house, of course. He's still going to get that done. And it was important that Ann kind of knew that Shanann also wanted to sell the house, just so that Ann would be happy to go along with it. And you had a similar situation playing out with Scott Peterson and him trying to dispose of that the property that he and Lacey shared, unsuccessfully as it turned out. And by the way, I think Lacey's mother was a real estate agent as well, or she worked in real estate. As the day progressed, that's Monday the 13th, Ann sent text messages to Chris and Shanann about the house. Shanann was usually vocal on issues, and Shanann was not weighing in on the group texts. And as I said, Chris Watts didn't really say anything about that. Ann justified that perhaps the divorce situation had Shanann not participating in the topic of the text. Now notice that he tells Ann that they're getting divorced, not separated. So some people he says separated, and some people that don't know him so well divorced, or know Shanann so well divorced. And Anne discussed comps in the neighborhood and updates to the home by text in an effort to estimate value. Anne saw on Facebook that Shanann was missing and realized that Shanann had not weighed in all day when she was texting Chris. Anne reached out to Chris and stated that she realized Shanann was missing and asked if he was okay. He assured Anne that he had reported to police and she could send prayers. Anne knew Chris and Shanann before they bought the house they lived in. They were both loving to each other and seemed really in love. Shanann was lovely, sweet and ambitious. Chris was quiet and a good father. And really interestingly, in that very simple general observation, Shanann was ambitious, Chris was quiet and a good father, I think is a lot of insight into the people and why the crime happened to some extent. Anne knew nothing about the Watts finances and believed that Shanann was successful with Thrive and she worked hard. But was she correct in that assumption? Then we go to page 671. Agent Galbraith thanked Anne for her time, and then Anne forwarded screenshots. And so just to reiterate, do you really think that Shanann had this conversation with Chris Watts about moving to Brighton on Monday morning at like 4 o'clock in the morning? Now bear in mind that's something that's also changed. Chris Watts initially said that he woke Shanann up at 5 and then he pushed that back to 4 or 4:15. Why would he need to talk to her when they'd already spoken about it? I mean, what was Shanann going to say? Yes, we should move. Well, she'd already said we should move. Yes, we need to speak to the realtor. Well, they'd already spoken to the realtor. What else was there to talk about? Okay, so I'm not going to take it any further than that. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.